a lot of people don't understand, both Laozi and Buddha were radicals. There was Buddha, for example, did not recognize any God, and Buddha didn't even recognize soul. So it is basically turn the table, on the entire world of religion.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to Fools and Sages. We are very happy and honored today to have with us author, teacher Ken Leong. We want to explore a little more some of the questions that we've opened up about Buddhism and Taoism, and also the nature of the self and the nature of consciousness and things that we've discussed also from a Western point of view. So to start off, Ken, why don't you give us a little bit of your background? And we were discussing earlier how we have both attained the ripe old age of wisdom
Yes.
and at least the pretension to same, and how at that age we have the advantage of seeing a lot of things and having a broadened view. So Ken, give us a little of your background.
Yes, I started out as a student in the STEM fields. I studied statistics, computer science, and basically that I had a double major, but I also had a minor in psychology. So um, that happens to be a very good tool for understanding the methodology when you're doing, let's say, the psychological studies, consciousness studies, um, and all that. And it allows you to screen out what is science and what is not. So that's my undergraduate background, and then I also have a degree in I have basically a master degree in business, from NYU. And after I completed my MBA degree, I worked for Wall Street for around 15 years. It's mostly the big Wall Street firms. Um, and I was doing investment banking and trading and risk management. Um, but my last job was with an energy trading firm, and as the big energy firm called Enron collapsed, in 2001. So uh, actually, yeah, it collapsed during that time, and so I had to find something else to do, because the recruiters were telling me that it would take a few years before the market would come back again. So I did not want to wait. I want to do something else. So I switched into education, and I am a certified teacher. I spent a few years, in the field of education, which again, it's a very powerful kind of knowledge, because once you understand education, you understand how people learn, and that is crucial whenever you want to either you want to teach or you want to write. You need to understand how the human mind, understand information. So I spent another 15 years teaching, you know, on either the high school level or at the college level, and I had a pretty interesting and productive time being a teacher and professor. Yeah. So that is my background, and my my first book actually came out in the mid 90s, and the name of the book is The Zen Teachings of Jesus, which is actually a rather revolutionary kind of approach, because very few people associate, Jesus with the Buddha. Um, or with the church teachings with Zen. Um, but I did something rather unusual, in the mid 90s, and the book has become very popular even among theologians. So that was uh, uh, um, a Christian Bible scholar actually published an article which is with the title of Jesus Through Buddhist Eyes, and I was included in one of these in this group of Buddhists. And guess who are the other people? They include the Dalai Lama and the Thich Nhat Hanh, and then myself. So I was in pretty good company.
Good,
Uh,
good company. Yeah.
yeah. So that book actually got me a lot of publicity, but then, after that, I had, quite a bit of challenges in my career. As I told you, my the whole energy trading industry collapsed, so I had to find something else to do. So and my income had dropped from an investment banking kind of salary to almost nothing, because I was in school. So but the benefit of being a Zen person, is that you learn to adapt. Because Lao Tzu says that what is superior goodness? Superior goodness is like water. And water adapts to whatever is the new environment, the new situation. Um, it doesn't matter if you fall down, as long as you can rise again. So that is my experience. And education, I actually enjoy being in education, because it's you know after several decades, I mean, the whole educational world has changed. So when I was teaching, for example, statistics to college students, I find that the entire pedagogy has already changed. But I was very excited about learning the new pedagogy for teaching statistics. Is definitely much better, much more conceptual. Um, when I was in college uh, in the 70s, it was just you're given a WAM calculator, and you can calculate the certain statistical numbers, which doesn't is mostly mechanical, but now everybody expected to understand the concepts, which is much more interesting. So
Right.
yeah, that is my
Well,
experience. Yeah.
yeah, great. Well, Ken and I, for our listeners, Ken and I met or came across each other in discussions about the Tao Te Ching. And, the Tao Te Ching has been one of these classics that I think sits in a very unique place in the world. It's so brief compared to a lot of religious texts, and yet it seems to sit in a place. It's a slippery fish philosophically, I think, for a lot of people that read it, and yet everyone senses that there's something really important going on with this communication. But I think that the average modern reader doesn't really grasp the distance that this work has come across to come into our hands today. It's come across a time, it's come across culture, it's come across language, it's been through iterations of interpretation, colored by the chapters that those interpretations come from. Uh, can you and then I think a lot of people don't realize the originals were written on bamboo
Right.
sticks that were bound together with fibers that were probably lost. So that introduced a certain ambiguity and certain repetitions. Could you rhapsodize for us the distance of this reach, the length of the bridge that we have to traverse to try to get our fingers around this mystical? Is it mystical or is it just distant? You know, what do you think?
I think, many Americans and Westerners, when they read the Tao Te Ching, they have already a Western kind of metaphysical frame, and because most Westerners are cultural Christians, they also tend to think of the Tao as God. But that's not how Lao Tzu has been talking about the Tao. Um, what is unique about Taoism is that there's no God, and and Lao Tzu even frown on all this talk about morals and virtues. So it's a totally different. I mean, Taoism is kind of like an outlier. So um, it's very difficult for Westerners to get that idea. And and
And so Lao Tzu's around 600 BC.
yeah, I was definitely during the Axial age. The Axial age is when Buddha, Socrates, and Confucius, these all these major thinkers came into the picture, and they have a very much a reformist movement. Because during that time they already have seen all these superstitions and abuses of religious power. So the axial age is actually a very important age, even though that many people are not aware of it. But for about 2 years, I've been doing research for a general introduction to Buddhist philosophy, and I went through all this background information, and and a lot of people don't understand. Both Lao Tzu and Buddha were radicals. There was Buddha, for example, did not recognize any God. You know, and Buddha didn't even recognize soul. So it is basically turn the table. On the entire world of religion. A lot of people are not aware of that. Um, so both the understanding of Buddhism and the understanding of Taoism, you really have to completely change your framework in order to have a deep understanding of what is going on. Yeah,
Yeah, it's almost as if the spiritual bell curve of
yeah,
the human race was marching through an evolution,
yeah,
and it hit that time of 700,
yeah.
500
Right,
BC, and for the first time, the leading edge of the bell curve could kinda get into, uh, its own individual authority rather
yeah,
to separate from tradition.
right, right.
It
So
seemed like we don't think of any spiritual heroes really before these as humans. We have
right,
gods, right? We have Krishna and things
right,
like that, but we don't actually get humans
yeah,
kind of making it into the end zone of realization
right,
until around there. I think Zoroaster was around the same time as well.
yeah. So it is a very interesting time, and in order for you to understand Buddhism and Taoism, you really need to understand what is going on during that reformist movement, which is the X age.
And are we in the Warring States period, a little before that?
Yes, Laozi, is a figure from the Warring State period, um, and that's when he wrote this Tao Te Ching. Um,
So this was a lot of little states,
yeah,
not the unified China that we think of today.
right, right, right. It's before Imperial China. Was, but what is interesting during about Laozi is that the previous dynasty is the Shang dynasty. Uh, the Shang dynasty. A lot of people don't understand that. I mean, China already had something similar to monotheism because there is this godlike figure called Shang Di. You know, uh, Di means emperor or the king, right? So Shang Di is a major deity which governs which is like the king of gods. And but that experience was not particularly positive for the Chinese people because the Shang dynasty is heavily involved with human sacrifice, and that was a horror. You know, so Laozi has already seen that, and beyond that, there's also the collusion between political power and religious power because during that time, the Shang ruling class would use divination, to communicate the heavens will, But if you have a technology which is not accessible for the common people, um, they use oracle bones in order to do divinations. You can essentially, once you control whoever is the person doing divination. I mean, you can make you know you can represent your own will as God's will, and that's a very that's allows a lot of corruption and basically abuse of power. So
It's like
Laos,
owning the
yeah,
media.
yeah. So the Laoji has already seen all these abuses. So his reform movement is not without basis. I mean it. So what is particularly interesting is that both Laozi and Confucius stayed away from religion. You know, they almost don't even mention a word about God or religion. Um, so both Confucius is more taking the humanism route, whereas Laozi is taking the naturalism route. But both stay away from religion. And
And
yeah,
and all three are psychologically informed, it
yeah,
seems.
yeah, that's right.
Like they've given some attention to internal conditions
Yeah,
of the human mind.
yeah. And and
Boaz, did you wanna
and Buddha the
uh,
same
uh,
thing. Why did Buddha? I mean, during Buddha's time, it was Brahmanism, which was the dominant religion. So why was Buddha against Brahmanism? It's the same story. I mean, the priest, the priestly class has tremendous power, and India has a caste system. So there is a ruling class which is dominated by the Brahmins, and then there's also different underclasses. Um, so Buddha actually um, has rebelled against that hierarchy, and um, so one thing that Buddha has said is that the nobility of a person is not dependent on one's birth. It depends on what you do. So it's based on your conduct. So that was very revolutionary. Um, and
And
and to say that
uh,
there is no God, that was definitely a no for the ruling class.
he was ahead of his time. Um, speaking of atheists, I was listening, Ken, to Richard Dawkins, in one of his various debates about the existence of God, and you probably know, he's a staunch atheist, but he refers to himself as a cultural Christian. And you just used that phrase a few minutes ago also. And I'm really curious about, and you also said that kind of the Eastern and Western metaphysics are fundamentally different.
Yeah.
And I wonder if you could go into a little more depth around that and give some more context for what being a cultural Christian might mean, and what you see the differences being, the important differences between Eastern and Western metaphysics. I guess in particular in terms of how that might cause a very different understanding of the Tao Te Ching, for example.
I think the biggest difference, you can understand it, Buddhist thought is based on dependent origination, which is the notion that everything exists because of everything else, so you cannot, I mean, Thich Nhat Hanh has, for example, used an example of a piece of paper, so how can you have this piece of paper, unless there are trees, unless there's sunshine, unless there are clouds, and there have to be workers who produce this piece of paper, so if you just look at a piece of paper, your mind should see all these other things. There's water, there are clouds, there are the sun, everything else. Just based on this piece of paper. That's dependent origination. I mean, seeing one thing, you see all. So there's this Huayan notion of um, one in all and all in one. That's everything interconnects. Um, so
And so by contrast, the Western metaphysics or culture um, is more about fragmentation and
yes,
um, uh, maybe that's also where individualism comes from as well. Are there any other characterizations you would put on East and West? I think that one's a really interesting one, the one you just shared.
yeah. So the first thing to understand is that in Eastern thought, there is no independently existing entity. Okay? So so because of that, there cannot be an independently existing God. Right? And there cannot be any independently existing consciousness or soul. Right? So that's from the Buddhist side. But on the Taoist side is similar. Why is that? Because Taoism is based on yin and yang, right? So in Taoism, Taoism is based on this notion of complementarity, which is the co-arising and codependence of opposites. So Lao Tzu has already said in the Tao Te Ching that uh, being and nothingness are codependent. You cannot have being without nothingness, and you cannot have nothingness without being. I mean, it's kind of parallels the Heart Sutras teaching that, you know, um, is about form and emptiness are just the two sides of the same coin. Form is emptiness, and emptiness is form. Right? So once you have this complementarity, Taoism can also build a structure very similar to Buddhism. Um, and I only recently realized that, because originally I was suspicious of the connection between, Buddhism and Taoism. And I thought that the two are quite different systems. But only recently, because I now go back to the ancient, or at least, the pre-modern Taoist commentators. The pre-modern commentators, there is one thinker by the name of Guo Xiang. Guo Xiang has a naturalistic interpretation of a Tao Te Ching. And there is another Taoist thinker who builds who builds the bridge between Taoism and Buddhism. And I now realize that this is not a stretch. Actually, there's a solid rationale for connecting Buddhism and Taoism, and the two are really just go together very perfectly. Yeah.
There is one more piece that I think is more is for you too, Brian, which is you used the phrase informed by psychology for Confucian, Lao Tzu, Buddha. I think those three, and Ken also referred to humanistic and naturalistic
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
perspectives, and I think maybe it's just worth putting some definitions out there before we move forward.
Yes. Naturalistic basically means that you don't need to bring in the supernatural. So you can understand the entire classical Taoism by using a framework of naturalism. There's no God, there's no ghosts, there's no demons, just naturalism. Everything is natural. Um, and humanism, is more the Confucius orientation. He doesn't want the human society to be based on the fear of God. I mean, Confucius has seen, the abuses of religious power during the Shang dynasty. So he builds his entire system based on human ethics. Yeah.
Right. See, I do want to go into that psychological component
Yeah.
a little bit.
Yeah.
One of the one-string banjo songs that I'm strumming all the time is about the difference between propositional knowledge and what I call dispositional knowledge. You might say one you might call knowledge about something,
Mm.
and the other, the dispositional, might be knowledge from within it.
Mm.
And I think about the wheelwright in Zhuangzi,
Mhm.
where the prince is reading the words of the ancients,
Mhm.
and the wheelwright says to him, "What are you doing?" "I'm reading the words of the ancients." And he says, "Oh, you're just playing in the," said he says, "Oh, you're just playing in the droppings they left behind." And then he gives the example of making wheels. And basically what he says is that making wheels is a dispositional thing. That now that I'm 70 years old, I'm good at making wheels, but I couldn't teach it to my own son propositionally. He would also have to go through making the wheels. And he says the wisdom of the ancients was just like that.
Mm.
And when they died, their wisdom died with them.
Mhm.
So when I read the first chapter of the Tao Te Ching,
Mhm.
and it starts to caution us about words
Mhm.
right off the top, right, about the things we can speak
Mhm.
as opposed to the ultimate actual things.
Mhm.
I I take away from that he's pointing us to a dispositional shift.
Mm.
Not that we're just going to be thinking different things are true,
Mm.
but that we'll actually be different somehow,
Mhm.
that we will experience things differently, that we'll go through a mental transformation, if you will.
Mhm.
And I think that when I look at that history you were talking about with religion, where we get the Buddha and we get Jesus and we get, all these characters coming through, they seem like they've had some dispositional shift.
Hmm.
They come back saying, now I see everything differently, whether they're Christian or they're Sufi, or they all seem to say, wow, now my whole experience of everything is different. And the clue that he gives us in chapter 1 is that Wo Yu Yi and Yu Yu Yi, I think it is, the with desire or without desire, or, he gives us the two ways of seeing. One way we see the secret of life, and the other way we see its manifest forms. What do you think about that? Can you speak to that, the nature of that dispositional shift? Because, my impression is that the Taoists, they're not just thinking things, they know how to do stuff. Like they really know how to do stuff on a level that the normal doing is transcended somehow.
If you look at the book of Zhuangzi, right? The book of Zhuangzi talks about a cook by the name of Po, and Po is so adept with using the knife that when he cuts into the body of a cow, the knife just swim between the bones, and because of that reason, his knife never gets blunt, and so how can you live with art? How can you master the art of living? You have to know, you have to understand the natural order of things. You cannot use brute force, because if you use brute force, I'm sure that your knife would get blunt, only after a couple of days, so it's a description of, that's the principle of Wu Wei. Wu Wei means you don't use brute force unless it's absolutely necessary. You try to align with the natural order of things, so that that's a way to preserve your life energy, and not run into friction. Yeah.
Right. But now the thing that I'm pointing to, though, is, if I take an example from martial arts, which is where I know the idea of Wu Wei, for me, it's at the end of a long bit of practicing. And it's an attainment in a certain, to a certain degree, to where I can now let the thing happen. And only up until then, I've always been kind of forcing it a little bit. And finally, I attain a degree of and I think that often Westerners tend to think that, oh, you just have this different thought, and then everything's different. And instead, from my experience in Taoist arts, is that it's actually about a transformation, that you will end up in this place where you can attain effortless effort. But it isn't just by thinking, oh, I shouldn't work too hard at this.
Right.
That it's actually, there is some eating bitter, there is some transformation that if I don't bring myself to it, I won't get through to the other end, and then I'll just still be the same fool I started as.
Right.
Does that hold up to your model of things, do you think?
Yeah, I can relate this to a saying of Bruce Lee. And Bruce Lee has this famous saying which says, "Don't think, feel." Right? Are you familiar with that quote? So when you are a novice, of course, I mean, your thoughts would enter, your head when you are maybe doing combat with other people. But once you have become a master level kind of person, things are already so much programmed into your consciousness that it's not necessary to think anymore. I mean, you just go by the flow. So that's, I think that's what it means. You don't need to calculate anymore, because then after a while, you would know how to respond by tapping into your insights and your intuition. You no longer think.
Through that process.
Yeah.
That you've gone through and transformed.
Yeah.
So, are you familiar with the characters where he kind of gives us that key in the first chapter? And he says, the one way we see the manifest forms, the other way we see the secret of life, or the mystery of mysteries. I think the term he uses is meow, maybe, or swan, or meow. But I'm interested in the clues he's giving us about the two different modes.
Yeah. I think it goes like, one is with desire. With desire, you see the manifestation of things. But without desire, you see, some kind of you see some kind of mystery, and some kind of ultimate reality. I cannot remember exactly, but that is the difference between desire and without desire.
And that the two are really the same, but we give them different names when they
they're
show
the
up.
two sides of the same coin. Yeah, they're not separate. Yeah.
Have you had a chance to look at Red Pine's translation of the Tao Te Ching?
I have his book, but because I read Chinese, so I don't really go through that English translation kind of thing. But what I recommend, I mean, if someone knows Chinese, is to go through, and I have recommended it in my group, in my own Taoist group, is you use one of these readers. There is a Laozi's reader and there is a Zhuangzi's reader. So they give you the original Chinese text, but they would,
and they'll give you the character by character.
Right.
This is just for our readers, so you can see, and people can start to get a grasp of the difficulty of reaching across that. The interesting thing that I liked about Red Pines was that he had a collection of other people's commentaries across the centuries.
That's very important, because most translations of the Tao Te Ching is just one interpretation, which is the translators. So it's very important to understand, throughout the history, what are the different commentators have said about a certain term or a certain word. So it gives you, not just one opinion, but it allows you to build alternative views.
Which is a tradition, right? This isn't just something with the Tao Te Ching. The I Ching has the wings, and the Sun Tzu has lists of famous people through history and what they got out of that particular chapter.
So,
and which is a popular religious theme also, isn't it? That it's a tradition within religions that you have a text and then you have different people's commentary over time. I know that happens within Judaism and within Islam, within one of the interesting things that I think came from a commentator who was more recent is he was looking at the use of the term Tao and the term Da. And I wanted to kind of unpack those a little bit. These get translated as the way and its power, or the way and its virtue, or the classic of the way and its virtue, or can you unpack some of those two terms? I mean, Ching is a classic, so it's the Tao and the Da that really are, again, those two pieces that we were sort of talking about.
The only interesting word here is "the," which is basically, I think, is best to understand it as virtual. Okay, but this virtual is very different from the Confucian notion of virtual. So
And the Western.
yeah, so it's very different from Christian virtual. Um, so the Laozi's notion of virtue is not a performance kind of thing. I mean, you don't, do certain things to signal to the world that you're a virtuous person. So if you're doing things, for you know for showing off, or for moral signaling, I mean, that's not real virtue. Right? So
That's
there,
with desire.
right, yeah. Okay. So real virtue does not have this kind of social signaling aspect. There's a chapter on that.
And could you expand on that? Because Tao is the word that gets all the attention,
Right.
and duh is what really kind of brings it home. Like when I hear the story about the butcher or the wheelwright or the sage in general, um, I get the idea that what they're manifesting is this type of virtue, which is like a deep mastery, not just an interactive type of, we think of virtue only showing up as between us and other people. But here it seems bigger than that. Is it fair to say?
I think that the exact quote is, superior virtue is not virtual, or at least superior virtue does not prize the conventional virtue or the Confucian virtue. And that's why it is virtue. Yeah. So that's the wording. Yeah.
And is it, how do you translate that? Is it like just Buddhist non-attachment?
Um, the translation would be something like, you don't do certain things for getting social approval. I mean, which is kind of like what the Confucians tend to do. If you're doing certain things for trying to get social kind of credit, then you're not being virtuous. So that's how I would explain it.
But do you think that their idea of virtuous action would be the same, but one is just not self-reflective and the other is, but that their understanding, or and I guess we're getting around slowly to chapter 5, and what does it exactly mean for the sage to be unkind in the way that nature is unkind, or heaven is unkind? I don't remember.
Yeah, unkind, I think, is much better to be understood as being impartial. So yeah, a lot of people don't understand, how to interpret chapter 5, because they are brought up in a Christian kind of culture. Because in the Christian kind of culture, God is supposed to be compassionate, is supposed to be kind, and all that. But the
And
problem
have a personality,
has a
right?
personality, but the Tao is not a person. I mean, you cannot really think of the Tao as anthropomorphic. And in fact, if the Tao is like a person, that's when the problem comes, because a real person would have favoritism. A real person would like someone and hate some other one. So, I mean, that's exactly the problem with the Judeo-Christian religions. If God is playing favorites, then he cannot be a God, because I mean, isn't God supposed to be the God for everybody? Why would God, favor a particular nation or a particular ethnicity? So the Tao, on the other hand, is not a person. Actually, a famous writer by the name of Anne Lamott, and I don't know whether you know of Anne Lamott. She wrote that to the extent that you understand, if you feel that your God is liking the same persons that you like and hating the same persons that you hate, then you can pretty much be, certain that this is an idol and it's not really God. So I think that's I think that is very relevant.
Well, and
And
I think we came to a similar place when in a discussion we had about Ibn al-Arabi,
yeah,
who basically said that any image that you have in your mind is not God.
right,
So, any God image is idolatry.
right,
Yeah. So,
yeah, and
would you say that impartiality is the same impartiality then of Chuang Tzu when his wife dies and he's beating the drum and people are saying, aren't you supposed to be sad? But
no,
him sort of realizing the impartial nature of reality and incarnation and all that?
I think Zhuangzi is addressing a different kind of topic. It is that, death is part of life. So if you are Taoist, you have to follow you have to follow nature, and so life and death are not two separate things. Once you have life, then there is death. And uh, so you shouldn't resist it. Um, Yeah, because it's all part of the natural process.
But but the difference is attachment, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Again, with desire or without desire.
right.
Yeah, a Tibetan Buddhist Lama told me that the high level Lama dies like a dog in the street,
Hmm. Okay.
which I think is that same no attachment,
No attachment. That's right. Yeah.
no attachment. Yeah,
Yeah. So that's the basic difference between the East and the West. The Whether it's Taoism or Buddhism, we emphasize this non-attachment as part of the practice, whereas the Western religions pretty much emphasize attachment. Yeah.
right.
That makes
Well,
me
now
curious
here's
about.
another. Oh,
Sorry, Brian. Do you mind?
no, go ahead.
It makes me curious about the book you said that you wrote that did pretty well about Jesus and Buddhism and kind of like, well, what's where's the connection? And I think you said earlier, that Jesus was kind of a Buddhist, and maybe that's the extent of it. But yeah, I'm curious now that we've kind of established some big differences between East and West. Maybe sameness is an interesting path too.
Um, you have to understand the historical time of Jesus. Jesus came towards the tail end of the Axial age. So Jesus came after Buddha, after Lao Tzu, after Zhuangzi, but he can still be considered as part of the reformist movement. So, in a way, if you look, because I mean, most American Christians, when they study Christianity, they study essentially the letters of Paul, which is very different from what Jesus' own teaching is. And my book is focused on the Sermon on the Mount, which is Jesus' own teaching, as in the Gospels. So it takes a totally different, mental attitude. And and actually, Jesus said something very similar to the Tao Te Ching, chapter 5, because Jesus said, you know, the Father sent the sun and the rain to both the good and to the evil. So in this case, the father is kind of like nature, nature doesn't discriminate. Yeah, and also the notions of good and evil is a social construct. It's a human construct. But nature does not have social constructs.
Right. So I was interested in um, they make a distinction in Japanese Buddhism
Hmm,
between the Jiriki and Tariki,
hmm,
where one is basically myself and power,
yeah, yeah.
and the other one is based on trusting others.
Hmm,
And I have always interpreted Lao Tzu
hmm,
as and the Taoist path as encouraging myself and power, encouraging realization and not just trusting in the Amitabha Buddha or
right.
Jesus, but actually bearing the realization and paying the price or the discipline to attain that,
Hmm,
which I also interpret as the Sufi approach.
hmm,
Um, Buddhism has a foot in both of those camps.
yeah.
Um, and I think later Taoism also
Hmm,
became more ritualistic
yeah.
but how do you interpret that distinction as showing up in both of those lineages?
It is a very common tendency for all religions to go down that path, because once a religion has become institutionalized and it's become popularized, then you're dealing with the masses, or the general public, who probably would not have time to read the classics. And they, even if they read it, they wouldn't understand it, and they wouldn't have time to meditate, or do any of those things that the elite can
Discipline.
have time to do. So I see it as partly, it is a difference in the demographics. So Buddha's original principles, I mean, original disciples were from the aristocracy, from the Brahmins class. But when it get Buddhism get transferred to China, it well, it's still in the beginning. It was being some kind of an aristocratic religion, but then later on, when it comes to Pure Land, Pure Land is essentially the religion for the masses, because the masses, if someone is a hard laborer, I mean, he wouldn't have time to meditate, and he couldn't understand the scriptures. So it is mostly, I mean, even here, when I go to the YMCA, I look at who has the time to attend those yoga classes, and the Tai Chi classes. These are mostly people from the middle class. Um, you don't see many people from the lower stratum of society attending those classes. Yeah. So
Which means that there's an extra bridge that they have to cross,
yeah,
that that now they're relying on language
yeah,
and trusting someone else through that linguistic transmission,
yeah.
which means that then we get into the interpretive problem.
Hmm.
They know what they mean when they say it, but how do I translate what they mean into what I understand?
Yeah.
And that to me seems like that's tangled up with chapter 1 in the Tao Te Ching also.
Chapter one, I mean, I take a somewhat different interpretation by incorporating modern science. And actually, when I was writing my Buddhist book, I spent a lot of time contemplating on what Nirvana is, right? Because Nirvana is kind of like Brahman. I mean, you cannot think about it. You cannot use human knowledge to understand it. So the Hindu term is nati nati, not that, not this, and
Not
not that, right? So, but why is that? I mean, you cannot really understand it you cannot really understand the reason until you look at basically science and biology in particular. Because we are all evolved organisms. And there's so much information in the universe that if we want to understand, if we want to know everything about the universe, then it would be it would because the signals are so many, it would become just white noise. It's totally chaotic. So as a living organism with survival necessities, you need to filter out all these different noises. And so not all the information about the universe is important for your survival. So, for example, as human beings, we don't hear certain sounds, we don't see certain lights. Our perception is very much fine-tuned to our biological necessity. So whatever that we understand about the universe is not the universe itself, is being filtered, right? So that's why the Tao that can be spoken is not the eternal Tao, and is not Nirvana, is not the ultimate reality. Everything is being filtered through our human organism, through this biological evolution, which basically screen out a lot of things. Yeah. So
What do you think that he means when he says that this is the gate to the mystery of mysteries?
yeah,
To see the mystery of life. What do you think neurologically he's talking about in that difference between with desire and without desire?
No, Lao Tzu is perhaps the most radical, and he plays this role of the absolute outlier in any religion in portraying the Tao in this language, which is using the language of the valley, right? Because in Tao Te Ching, there is this mention of the valley spirit. It's not really a mystery, but it reflects more of the pro-feminine nature of the Tao. The valley actually is just a metaphor of the female genital. And that's why it is the valley. I mean, it's not something protruding, but it's something which has
A
a gap.
space.
Yeah, it has space. So he's using this female metaphor to understand the emphasis of Taoism.
But it seems he's also pointing to seeing the thing that we don't usually see. And that's one of the things that this commentator, Tao Te Ching, I think his name was, he was talking about allusions to the moon, and in the character Tao, and the idea of a face that's going, that it actually was an allusion to the way the moon changes its phases and then disappears completely and then shows up completely. And that the Tao is sort of like that, like we can't see it in the daylight of things, but it shows up in the nighttime or in its own ways, or I mean, there's some sort of and then he looks at all these other terms that he says are also lunar illusions, which of course, totally over my head, any of that. But I thought it's an interesting idea because the idea of yin and yang, as I understand it, the yin is the side of the hill that we can't see.
Mm-hmm.
And so it seems like he's kind of pointing at the stuff we don't usually see, which is why I'm thinking it's a cognitive shift somehow.
Right. I don't interpret it that way. I interpret it as strategy, right? Because Taoism emphasized the receptivity and not using brute force. So that's the feminine way, and it makes sense, because if you can get things done without using brute force, why use it? Why have this hard clash? with other people. You can even see it in the recent war, the American war with Iran. How did Iran fight? Right? It utilizes natural advantage. And from what I understand, the Iranian generals have studied in detail the Chinese art of war, which is based on Taoist concepts, right? It it would not make sense for Iranians, which is militarily weaker, to try to fight the Americans head on. So they use very much feminine strategies. Um, so they would, for example, the use of drones. They use very inexpensive drones to to fight the war instead of very expensive missiles, right? Um, so that's a yin strategy.
Right. Well, and also the bigger something is, the slower it is to be able to turn or change its
Yeah,
course.
yeah,
And the missiles are yesterday, drones are tomorrow.
right, that's right.
And adaptability is the one thing that you have.
Yeah,
Flexibility, potentially adaptability.
right.
If you're not the bear in the room.
Right. Because I mean, you need
Yeah.
to know your own comparative advantage, right? So if Iran has certain comparative advantage, you have to know that. I mean, you don't try to become always the biggest and the most high tech and all that. If you can accomplish your purpose using very cheap drones, why not, right? So that's really part of the art of war.
Right. But do you really think that I'm not, I don't want to bust your butt on this, but I really want to unpack that. I want to look at the Chinese. The very end of that first chapter, Chung Miao Shemen, the all essence, the gate of all essence,
Mhm.
um, as the mysterious uh, mystery of mysteries. Well, I guess that's before Swan Shi Yu, Swan Chung Miao Shemen.
Mm.
And I know I'm not pronouncing that right, but you probably have memorized the
Yeah.
last bunch. Yeah. Um, yeah, and I mean, am I really reading in something to not you want something mystical in there?
Well, I mean, it goes back to what I said earlier about, you as a human, you cannot understand ultimate reality, because you can understand things only through your cognitive and perceptive system, which
Right.
is contingent on your particular species. So a bird
Right.
would perceive something very different. An earthworm would perceive the world in a very, very different way. So just
Yeah.
forget about being someone of a particular species that you can know the secrets of the universe. I mean, just forget about it.
Yeah. I guess the argument is that you can experience it somehow,
Yeah,
though you can't necessarily understand it
right.
in a way that can be spoken. I mean,
Yeah,
that's what I was getting out of that whole
uh,
chapter there.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. My interpretation is mostly through the cognitive lens. I mean, the human's cognition and perception is very specific. So
sure, sure.
um,
Now, have you been exposed to some of the like Dr. Ian McGilchrist's ideas about the different function of the different hemispheres?
I
Or
know
you
of.
think we could be talking about a different functional balance between the hemispheres?
I
The
mean,
master in the emissary idea?
yeah, I know of his book. But um, yeah, first of all, the what is called the different hemisphere, the brain lateralization theory is constantly evolving. What we think is a left brain function is actually now understood to be also a right brain kind of related function. So I don't really particularly get into that, but yeah, I'm well aware of his book because many people mention it. Yeah,
Uh-huh, right.
yeah,
And I think his basic argument is that we use the emissary where we should use the master, and the master where we should use the emissary, something like that. Because again,
yeah.
I'm looking for a cognitive shift.
Right, right.
When I was young, I read The Secret of the Golden Flower.
Uh-huh.
Are you familiar with that?
Yeah.
And Carl Jung had an introduction to that where he said he made reference to the different psychological balances between modern Westerners and the ancient Chinese when these texts were written, and the people, in fact, that they were written to and for.
Mm.
Um, what ideas do you have about that? About modern people as opposed to, like, do you think we've cognitively changed in a significant way in terms of that would be relevant for meditation or for any of these kinds of disciplines?
Um, I can relate to that, especially the left brain, right brain thing, by relating it back to my teaching experience. As a math teacher, and most people when they think about math, they think of it as a lab brain kind of activity, mostly analysis. But when I was teaching math, I emphasized that you need to use both sides of the brain, and because it's only after you have a theory and you need to make a proof. You need to prove a theory or a theorem that you use the analysis. But how do you get the original idea? I mean, how do you get a new idea for a mathematical theorem? I mean, that's mostly inspiration. It's mostly, maybe you have a particular dream, like Archimedes, who dreamt up, this new theory when he was in the bathtub. You know, a lot of the mathematical inspirations came when we are not actually actively working on the math problem. You know, is when we are relaxed or maybe taking an evening walk. Things just come to you. So you have to be able to, tap into both sides of the brain, and so intuition is important, holistic vision is important. Um, so yeah, you and I've told my students is is that if you just use analysis without using your intuition and the right brain, then you'll be like trying to walk with only one leg, and you're just hopping. So that's the significance of that.
Ken, I'm wondering about kind of going back to the comment you made about, the Buddha not thinking of human beings having a soul. And I liked how you connected that um, to the idea of dependent origination, where you can't have an individual soul um, because of this, kind of collective consciousness.
Yeah.
Um, but I'm wondering, what do we make of the self then, right? Um, how, how do we think about um, really what the self is?
Yeah.
Ultimately, under all the layers of identity and ego and all of that, is it only collective, or is there also something individual at
Uh,
the bottom of that well?
the self is a notion that is invented for doing social transactions. Because if you don't have an identity, how can you what would you put down in a marriage certificate, or how do you put down, an identity on a deed, on a property? So you need some kind of label and identity just to do social transactions. So it's pretty much a social necessity. But but there is, but it is the self is a fiction, to the extent that any name, let's say Chase Manhattan Bank, that's a fiction, because even if the bank has a complete turnover in its staff, even if all its assets have been liquefied, even if it has undergone bankruptcy proceedings, people can still sue the bank, through the court system. So it is. So that is, you cannot associate the name with some kind of tangible thing. And
Well,
when you
what is it that cries then when it's hungry the day after it's born,
say it again,
before
please.
it's named? What if it's not a self?
Mm,
What is it that cries for the nipple
mm.
when it's hungry?
Well, Buddha consider, a human being as a combination of the five aggregates. The five aggregates includes the physical body, it includes sensations, perception, and mental habits. And so all these different things, they have to be together. So it is that system. Okay. So but when you say that there is a self, you're not talking about that system. I mean, most people think about a soul, which is kind of like a spirit, which is different from that, physical system. So when,
Right. So a
yeah,
lot rides in on. I think that's almost more soul than self. Uh, the self is something I think that we experience. The soul is something that we hear about, and
yeah,
we maybe that's the faith in others part.
yeah, because Buddha has been very transparent in saying that aside from the five aggregates, which are all these components that makes a sentient being, there is no ghost or spirit standing behind all these five aggregates. I mean, and actually, Buddha has
Right.
reprimanded one of his disciples for teaching that there is a soul that goes from one life to another. I mean, he made a scene out of that. He publicly reprimand that disciple and say that he is misrepresenting him. Yeah, so um, it yeah, so this mind is body spirit dichotomy is very much a Western tradition. It doesn't exist in Buddhism or in Taoism.
This idea of a separate existing self.
Right.
Yeah, even the Western traditions started to get away from that, I
Right.
think.
Right.
Uh, you start to see within Western philosophy them sort of coming up from the other side, the idea of interdependent
Yeah.
originations.
Right. Right.
That I
So
think this is where all these ideas of the
it
one
stopped again.
show up from.
Um,
I guess we were talking about the self and the nature of the
yeah.
self, and that Western philosophers also, when they started talking about the one,
Mm,
they happened, they got there by that idea that everything depends on other conditions and other causes, and
yeah.
Aristotle followed that all the way back to saying that something must have moved first,
Mm. Right.
and he called it the prime mover, the first thing
Yeah.
that moved without
Yeah.
being moved by something else.
Yeah.
which I guess is like the Tao for Lao Tzu. One question I had is, do you think that the self is the same for Taoists as it is for Buddhists?
Uh, no, Buddhism has a much more sophisticated understanding of the self. Actually, uh, that's the true mark of Buddhism, is that it has a very deep understanding of what the self is, which is an illusion. Um, and the best way to understand that is that Buddha used a parable, or some kind of simile of a chariot, right? So in a chariot, you can identify where the wheels are, where the carriage is, where the axles are, but you can never identify where the chariot itself is, because that is an abstraction, right? So, this is a problem of what is called in philosophy called reification. You confuse an abstract concept with something which is tangible. So it's the same with the self. We can say that, oh, this is my hand, this is my head, this is my leg, and these are my thoughts. But where is the person? I mean, that person is an abstract concept. You know, it's just like the name of Harvard. Harvard University will still be there, even though that the student body has complete turnover, and all the staffs have complete turnover. And even if Harvard has migrated from the East Coast to the West Coast, I mean, it's just a name. So don't confuse the name with what is tangible. Yeah. So that,
I call that thingifying,
yeah, yeah.
where we just generate a thing.
We're not saying that only tangible things are real, right? I mean, a
Well, it
feeling is
depends on what
real, or
when the word real carries a lot of assumptions,
yeah.
right? So there are many different levels of reality. There is, for example, emotional reality. There's symbolic reality. There is physical reality. So,
Depends
uh,
on the meaning of is.
yeah, right. So, I mean, a lot of people are very confused because they are not, they're not aware of all these assumptions. And that's why even when I was a teenager, my one of my teachers told us that whenever we use a special term, we have to understand, in what context that we are using that term, right? Without specifying the context and the sense, then it doesn't make sense to just debate about the term. Right?
So when Lao Tzu says that the 5 colors blind the eye and the
Mm,
5 notes deafen the ear, that's
mm,
kind of what he's talking about, isn't it? I think Krishnamurti said when you tell a child the name of a bird, he'll never
mm,
really see that bird again ever.
right.
Uh,
Yeah, I think uh, Richard Feynman Richard Feynman has made a similar remark. Just knowing the name does not mean that you understand, that phenomenon. Yeah.
right. Yeah, and I guess in fact it can obstruct us from understanding the phenomenon, I guess is the more critical insight there.
Yeah. Because once
That
you
by
yeah
Go
once you
ahead.
bring in a name, it brings in a lot of different connotations, which may or may not be relevant. Yeah. So in some people call Buddhism some kind of nominalism. It's just name only, right? Um, so yeah, and we're often confused by the name and the substance.
Right. Whereas in reality, I think a lot of people don't understand that that Buddhism is extremely scientific in
Yeah,
its
it is.
approach to things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so is Taoism, and that's why, there is a book written several decades ago. It's called the Tao of Physics, where Capra has noted the convergence between Eastern philosophy with modern science. Um, but you don't see that, any convergence between, let's say, the Western religions with science. I mean, there's there is no convergence there.
Right. Unless it's uh, some forms of psychology,
Yeah,
yeah,
mysticism. Yeah,
magical thinking, things
yeah.
like that. I feel like there's something that both Buddhism and Taoism have that make them relevant for today
Mm,
and for the condition of the world. Do you think that? I mean, part of that I read from the interest in the public.
mm,
Part of it is the fact that these things are so old, but they haven't disappeared, but they
mm.
seem in some sense anecdotal, maybe. Do you have anything on the screen like that?
I think, the West fascination with Eastern religions and spirituality, much of it have to do with their um basically their objection to modernity, right? Because modernity, brings a lot of, ugliness, if you will. It has disenchanted the world, right? And there's a loss of meaning. Um, and they try to regain all those lost things from Eastern religions, but that is a kind of romanticism, because they don't really understand what, Lao Tzu or Buddha is actually teaching. Um, but
Well,
it sounds mysterious, so they
well, and
everybody. Yeah,
there's always an interpretive danger, right? That we only
yeah,
find what we're looking for.
yeah,
And so we can never really find anything except the stuff we already know.
yeah.
Well, that's kind of a I think that's a realistic answer, Ken, and I also think it's cynical, um, which maybe is good enough because it might be realistic to be cynical about modernity. But maybe I want to ask for your more optimistic perspective also, because
Mm,
just as we see physics approaching an understanding of the true nature of reality and consciousness, that ought to be a reason for optimism, and that's the outcome of modernity. So,
yeah,
so I think Brian's question about what what is what's there in Taoism and Buddhism for us today to encounter or apprehend, like the degree of fragmentation and loss of meaning, as you put it, that we're experiencing. Is there room for Buddhist and Taoist concepts to find a new traction in the modern West, say, or maybe in the modern world?
um, yeah. Eastern philosophies definitely bring a different framework, a different worldview, which is very different from the West. So in that sense, it brings a different alternative. It brings a totally different way to look at the world. Um, the West is very dualistic. It's only mind and matter. There is good and evil. It's mostly dualistic. That Eastern philosophy is much more holistic, or at least non-dualistic. So um, that can be considered as a positive development.
Yeah,
Do you
I guess
think
I hope for
psychologically?
that. Did you say psychologically, Brian?
Yeah, do you think there's a psychological dimension to I often refer to the world of duality as the world of this and that,
Mm.
and, it feels like a place that we can get stuck in psychologically. Yeah, I'm wondering if because, Buddhism has been so popular, I guess maybe there's 2 things. There's what are Westerners looking for, and then there's what are they finding, and are they the same thing might be a third question. Um,
Yeah, I would be reluctant to say that there is a panacea or some kind of solution, from the East, because there is, and so um, we shouldn't be driven by some kind of idealism or romanticism, um, but just the fact that the East and West are talking, together, and if you look at the character like the Dalai Lama, who is very interested in Western sciences, I mean that's a very positive development. Um, and and the you know Buddhist teachers like Thich Nhat Hanh is very um, proficient, in teaching Buddhism using a language that Westerners can understand. Uh, so So there are some positive developments, and I think that the East and West can really learn from each other, um, and create a better synergy and offer new alternatives.
did you have any other stones to unturned.
So no, I think I feel complete for today.
Okay. Yeah, and I'd be interested maybe in doing an episode where we focus on Buddhism
Mm-hmm.
because that there's definitely a lot of information to be gleaned from that, I think. Do you have a final message for folks that are interested in this topic about how to go about it
Um,
or takeaways or anything to post note?
um, my main message is, don't reify things. So the Tao is not a thing. um, don't confuse the name with substance. That's one of the main messages of Taoism.
Right in that first few lines.
Yeah, good. I will avoid reification when possible.
Well, and that's why I was thinking about that, about how instead of Western philosophy has tried to focus on what is,
Mm,
and it maybe should have been more focused on what's going on,
mm.
as in a more process oriented, but we
Yeah,
tend to want to chop things up into little pieces that we can run our machine on.
yeah.
And
Taoism is totally process philosophy. So and
process. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. And I think that's maybe the hardest part for people with a Western mindset is we're still suffering from the Platonic forms, maybe.
And from uh the like I don't think it's just modernity that caused thingification. I think I think Bergson saying that we're geared towards being able to build stuff that requires thingification. That's an evolutionary adaptation. So um, having a process orientation instead is an interesting alternative because I had thought of it more as a non-dual or an unfragmented or coherent orientation. But of course, process is part of that. Like the manifestation of reality is process. I think that's a legitimate way of looking at it. I don't think that's original.
That's Bergson. Yeah, right.
Thank you, Ken. To talk with you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for your time, and we will definitely speak again.